Welcome back to the Introduction to Insect Morphology and Anatomy. I believe this is part 26, and today I wanted to start talking about larval morphology. So with insects, you have two different groups. You have the hemimetabolous insects and the holometabolous insects. Hemimetabolous insects don't go through a complete metamorphosis, so the adults look, or the juveniles look like tiny adults, but without wings. So their morphology is largely the same as the adult morphology. So everything that we've talked about up to this point applies to the hemimetabolous juvenile insects, except for maybe the presence of gills, the absence of wings, and the absence of a reproductive system. With holometabolous insects, they go through complete metamorphosis, so their juvenile anatomy is completely different, and these are the larval insects. So I wanted to start today with the caterpillar, since it's the one that people are most familiar with, and it's not super complicated, but there's a lot of terms that you might not be familiar with, and a lot of detail that you have to pick up on. Overall, the caterpillar is pretty straightforward. There are other insects that it's sometimes with the larval insects it's difficult because of the lack of structures. With adult insects, there's a lot of structure that are frequently easy to find because there's defined segments. There are sclerotized plates and stuff like that. So things that are landmarks that are easy to find. With larval insects, because they're generally soft-bodied, there's not a lot of sclerotization, not a lot of obvious segmentation. Sometimes things can be hard to find, and as you progress with like the more advanced insects, like when you're talking about fly larvae, some of the advanced fly larvae, there's very little structure to look at. So you can sometimes get lost in the goo, as it were, because they're just very soft, very structureless maggots. So the caterpillar is a good thing to start with because everyone's familiar with them. So for the beginning of this, this is our caterpillar in question. So the general body structure of insects still apply. You have the head. So you have the head. You have three thoracic segments here. So this is the thorax. And it's T1, T2, and T3. You have the three thoracic legs. These are the true legs. And then after that, you have the abdominal segments. So all of this on the caterpillar is the abdomen. So these are the abs, or abdominal segments. And they're usually abbreviated as A1 through A10. So that's A1, A2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 9 is a little small, and 10 is fairly tiny. So 10 goes all the way back there. On the abdomen of caterpillars, on the abdominal segments, they have the prolegs. These are false legs, but they are useful in that they cling to the substrate that the caterpillars are crawling on. They are covered with little Velcro hooks here, and so they are really good at holding on to the sticks or the leaves or whatever it is that they're crawling on. The structure of the prolegs is really important for the identification of the caterpillar and the number of prolegs. So that is a proleg. There's another set of prolegs or claspers down here, sometimes called claspers. And occasionally, depending on the group, you could have an extra set of prolegs on A2 and A7, like in the megalopygids. And sometimes you will also see vestigial prolegs on some caterpillars. So instead of like in the megalopygids where they have extra prolegs, sometimes you'll just see like little nubbins of prolegs on some of these other body segments, depending on the caterpillar family. Additionally, the mouth parts are all intact. These are mandibulate mouth parts for chewing, and you may have to take apart the mouth parts in order to see certain structures like the number of teeth on the mandibles, or count the segments of the maxillary and labial palpi, or look for the spinnerets, which are on the labium, so the bottom lip of the caterpillars, or the number of stomata, which are the simple eyes. And if we zoom in here onto this noctuid, we can see the stomata are here. The number of lenses on for the stomata of the caterpillar eyes varies between 1 and 6 generally. And you can see the mouth parts here. This is the side of the mandible. Here is the labrum. The labium is back here, which will have the spinneret coming off of it, and then the maxilla are in the middle. More importantly, on the insect head, if we zoom in here, you have all of these setae, which you might need to count or check for presence. And then also you have the frontoclypeal suture, which is this triangle suture that runs down the head, and its presence or shape might be useful for identification of caterpillars. Let's get rid of some of these lines so you can see the caterpillar head in its full glory. Additionally, for the true legs, you can see that they are segmented, and they have generally most of the segments, if not all of the segments, of the adult insect. Sometimes the segments are fused, so you'll be missing some segments, but you have the pretarsus here. This is the pretarsal claw. You have the tarsus here. You have the tibia here. You have the femur, and then this fleshy appendage at the end is the coxa. So still the segments. Sometimes these apical segments are fused, but more often than not, all of the segments are present. The other thing that we need to talk about that's very important is the setal arrangement on caterpillars. So on caterpillars, the setae are general. There's a certain type of setae called the primary setae, which are always present. The setae that you see on this noctuid, these are the primary setae. They are all named, and they are generally all present, but in various arrangements depending on the family and the species. There is another group of setae called the secondary setae, which are not always present, and these are present on what are normally called the furry caterpillars or the fuzzy caterpillars. All of these extra setae that you see are not named. They are not particularly identified. They are not always in the same arrangement. They are extra. They are usually defensive. But still, the primary setae are somewhere on this, buried in this mess of setae. But for most caterpillars, you will need to be able to see the primary setae in order to do an identification. Frequently, you can get to family level ID just off of other general characteristics. But anything beyond family, you will definitely need to be able to see the setae. So all of these setae are named, and they are frequently on a structure called a panaculum. So this sort of swelled plate that you see these setae coming out of is called a panaculum, or all of them cumulatively are called the panacula. This little structure here, that is a spiracle. This is a thoracic spiracle, the prothoracic spiracle. Although it technically, I believe, evolved from the second thoracic segment, it just migrated forward. There is frequently a prothoracic shield, not on this particular caterpillar, but on many caterpillars, there is a well-defined prothoracic plate. And then also this panaculum here is sometimes swollen and becomes a presporacular shield. But not always. There's a lot of variability in caterpillars. But the presence or absence of these structures will help you identify the various caterpillars. So, for the primary setae, they are always present, generally speaking. They are named, and their arrangement is species-specific or family-specific. So how we communicate the arrangement of these setae is something called a setal map. So this is what a setal map looks like. Let's move this over a little bit. So this would be a setal map for the prothorax. This would be that prothoracic shield that I was talking about. And this would be the presporacular shield, or sometimes it's called the presporacular shield. So this is the spiracle on this map. So how you read this map is this rectangle you see is a spread out body segment. So this is the entire segment, one side of the entire segment of the caterpillar. Generally speaking, how this is read is the head is on the left. This is the head. And the tail is on the right, tail end. So You should arrange your caterpillar in such a way that you can match up the setal map this way. On the prothoracic setal map, you will see reference the XD1 and XD2. These are only CD that are found on the prothoracic shield. But D1 and D2, this D is for dorsal. SD equals subdorsal. L is for lateral. So these are the L's, L1, L2, L3, the 3 CD on the lateral portion of the caterpillar. SV is subventral. And V is ventral. So ventral will be below, this is where the leg comes out. So the ventral will be below the leg on the setal map. So when you're looking at the CD of the caterpillar, you may need to turn it over so that its ventral surface is facing up, so its stomach is facing up. Subventral CD will be right above the leg. Lateral CD will be right next to the spiracle. So this is a spiracle. And then on the prothoracic shield, you will find the arrangement of the other CD. So because this is only on the left side, this is just one side, this is left side, you should see the same arrangement mirrored on the right side. So the whole segment has twice as many CD as what are pictured on the setal map. So if we go back to this guy, you can see some of these CD, right? CD coming off the prothoracic shield are up there. You have one right next to the spiracle. You have two slightly below the spiracle, and then you have a number of CD above the leg, and kind of one behind the leg. This map is not for that particular caterpillar. This is just an example setal map. So this would be the setal map for the prothorax. Then there is the setal map for the abdomen of the caterpillars. So if we go back to this guy, you can see that there are CD on each of these abdominal segments. You have the proleg here, so you have a CD coming out here, you have a CD coming out here, you have a CD here, and then you have CD coming off the top. Sometimes the CD break off, like here, the CD is broke off, but the pinaculum is still intact and the root of the CD is still visible. So even if the CD breaks off, you can still use the setal map. So on the abdominal segments, the CD are generally speaking in the same arrangement. Generally speaking, if you are using a key and it specifically tells you look at this abdominal segment, look at A1, it's probably because that setal map is only for A1 and the CD are in a different arrangement on the other abdominal segments. So frequently it will say like A3 through A6 setal map. And that means you need to only be looking at the CD of abdominal segments 3 through 6 because they're in a particular arrangement. Pay attention to the particular instructions in a dichotomous key for which abdominal segments this particular map applies to. But generally speaking, the abdominal segments have a sort of similar, if not identical and repeating setal map, except for maybe like on A10, the very end, the butt end, the setal map is sometimes very different on 9 and 10 because they don't have like a spiracle, and the segments are generally shortened and reduced, so they might have a slightly different setal map. So again, D is for dorsal, SD is for subdorsal. The subdorsal CD are usually around the spiracles on the abdominal segments. The lateral CD are usually right below the spiracle. The subventral CD are either right above the leg, and by leg I mean the proleg, or they are actually attached to the top of the proleg, and then the ventral CD will be right below the crochets. So on this particular diagram here, let me get rid of all this red so you can see better. This circle here represents the structure of the crochets, and this circle here is the proleg. So this is the proleg, this is the spiracle, these are the crochets. if that makes sense. So now that I'm going to delete it, so you can use your imagination. So you have the crochets, the proleg, the spiracle. So again, dorsal seta 1, dorsal seta 2, subdorsal seta 2. Frequently, this will not be present. Sometimes it is present, but it'll be very, very small. And then with the lateral CD, sometimes it's only like 1, sometimes it's 1 and 2. L3 is not always present. So if we go back to this guy at the beginning, you can kind of see some of the CD here. So this is the spiracle. Here's the proleg. This is probably L2. This is probably L1. This is probably SD1, SD2. These are dorsal D1 and D2. And then down here will be the subventral CD of some sort. And I'm just going off the top of my head. Again, this setal map does not apply to that caterpillar. It's just an example. So the other structure that is very, very important when looking at a caterpillar are the prolegs and the crochets. So if you were to flip over a caterpillar, this is the underside of caterpillar. These structures here are the proleg crochets. These little red things. So if we zoom in, you can see all of the little hooks. So crochets act as kind of like Velcro hooks, and they latch on to whatever substrate the caterpillar is moving on. It helps them cling, it helps them walk. The structure of these hooks, the shape of the hooks, and the arrangement of the hooks can be used to identify, usually down to genus level. In some families, it can almost always be used to identify family level. And the arrangements are variable. So these are my terrible drawings. The first arrangements that you need to be aware of are whether or not there are multiple hooks present. So you have the first term here are the serial terms. What is the how many lines in a row? How many series are there of hooks? If there's just one series of hooks, no matter how many shapes are present, if all the hooks are just in one line, then it's uniserial. If there are stacked hooks, or the hooks are broken up into multiple pieces, it's multiserial. And then the second word is the ordinal. So how many different shapes of hooks or sizes of hooks are there present in the series? If it's uniserial, uniordinal, there's only one sized hook in one line, no matter what the shape of the line is. If it's biordinal, there are two different sized hooks. Triordinal, you have three different sized hooks. And then, like this last one, is still uniordinal because it's just one kind of hook present, but they're divided into multiple parts. And then what the shape of the crochets can be in can also be highly variable and telling what sort of creature you have. So like these ellipse, this open ellipse, the crochets will be in hooks facing each other. Sometimes the crochets are in a full circle. Sometimes it's an open circle, horseshoe, half moon. This is like the noctuids. So if we go to our first guy here, you can see that this is kind of in an open sort of crescent. That's typical of the noctuids. And then you have, sometimes you'll have hooks within hooks. So you'll have one ring of hooks, and then there'll be a line of hooks in the center. So there are terms for all of these structures. I'm not going to go through all the terms. Generally, when you're using a key for caterpillar ID, it will tell you the terms, and generally it will show you a picture of what that term refers to. Like there should be a size and shape. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was other structures on caterpillars that you should be aware of. So this is a corn earworm, very, very common noctuid, Heliothis, or I think the genus now is Chloridia. And they're fairly easy to identify. Some other structures here that can help you identify a caterpillar. On the head here, you have patterning. It's kind of like this leopard spotting. The presence of this leopard spotting or the patterning itself can be very telling for what sort of caterpillar you're dealing with. Generally speaking, though, the color of the caterpillar is not particularly telling. There are some caterpillars where it is. For run-of-the-mill noctuids and pyralids and stuff, the general color is not telling. The patterning can be, because you can see like how there's this striping effect, but the overall color, like this yellow or whatever, it's not very telling. It depends frequently on the environment and what the caterpillar has been eating. So if it's been eating a lot of a certain color of flower or a lot of green stuff or a lot of yellow stuff, it'll change color because frequently these caterpillars are basically clear fleshed, they're see-through, and the color is whatever is in its gut. But the stripy pattern, where like the variability in the color can tell you quite a bit. The other thing that you may notice once we zoom in is that the panacula on this corn earworm and the actual cuticle are of a different texture and three-dimensional shape. So these are called chalazi, and they're basically warts that have one seta coming out of it. These are panacula that have warted up, and they will always be kind of like a pyramid shape. They'll be kind of a cone or pyramid shape, and they'll have a hair coming out of it. And that's very, very common with the Heliothis or Chloridia genus. And then they also have these little spinules all over the skin, all over the cuticle. So on most caterpillars, the cuticle will either be smooth or it will be kind of granular. It'll look a little rough, sandpapery. In this case, it's actually covered with little spikes, little microtricha, usually referred to as spinules. Other strange structures on caterpillars. Sometimes they have these extra setae that stick way out in the front or the back. These are called hair pencils. And they are usually located on a plate called a verruca, which is basically a plate that's covered in stinging, urticating hairs or stinging hairs. So this is a tussock moth caterpillar. You'll usually find them on trees, all sorts of trees. And they do have stinging setae, but the presence of these pencil hairs will tell you what it is, or hair pencils will tell you what it is almost immediately. You can also have these stinging caterpillars. So when a chalaza or chalazi on the corn earworms are these little single-haired pyramidal growths. On some stinging caterpillars, you'll have pyramidal growths with lots of hairs coming off of them, and that is called a scolus. And that's usually just for defensive stinging hairs. What else? The sphingids. So this is a very common group of caterpillars. These are the sphinx moth caterpillars, like tobacco hornworms or tomato hornworms. They have these horns, hence the name of hornworms. They have these horns that come off the back. These are kind of passive defensive structures. It's usually used to like scare off predators. They don't sting, they just kind of scare stuff. So this is a horn. And then they also have, very obviously, the other caterpillars have these, but it's very, very obvious on sphingids. So this is the body segment. And you have these little lumps, kind of look like fat rolls on the caterpillars. These are called annulates. And the number of annulates per segment can be used to help you identify the caterpillar. How many little rolls are in the segment, how many sub-segments are in the segment, as it were. This is a special kind of caterpillar. This is a papilionid swallowtail caterpillars, very large, beautiful swallowtail butterflies. This is what their caterpillars look like. And they have this defensive structure on the front of them called the osmeterium. And this produces a smell. So normally they crawl around like that on the bottom image where there's no osmeterium. And then when they get scared, they stick out this osmeterium out of the front of them, and it stinks and it scares off birds and stuff like that. Generally, papilionids feed on poisonous plants, so they can shoot out, and then they save the poison so they can kind of use it as a defensive compound. So this is called an osmeterium. I can never remember how to spell this. Osmeterium. And then finally, I wanted to show you something when your caterpillar ID goes wrong, because I have seen this quite a bit. If you collect a caterpillar or you see a caterpillar, someone brings you a caterpillar, and you're like, I can't ID this thing. What a weird caterpillar. It has all these prolegs. There, you have your end one here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Lots of prolegs, way more than I normally see on a caterpillar, but there's no crochets. There's no crochets. And it has this one giant stomata instead of the 6 small ones that I normally see. This is not a caterpillar. Even though it's crawling on a little branch, it's eating leaves, this is a sawfly. This is a sawfly larva. It is a type of wasp. You frequently will find these on like pine trees and fir trees, but this is a sawfly larva, and they're easy to confuse with caterpillars. Generally speaking, if you see a big black eye on it, it's definitely not a caterpillar. So don't waste your time trying to do a caterpillar ID on it. You'll be spinning your wheels for quite some time. So that's all I wanted to say about caterpillar morphology today. If you've been through the whole course, you'll be familiar with all of these terms. It's just that they're applied in a lot of different ways on larval ID. If you have questions about caterpillar ID, go ahead and put it in the chat or in the comments. Like and subscribe, and maybe I'll do another segment on caterpillar ID if there's interest in it. Talk to you guys later.